Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a kind of a NATO reaction live and a military aid news. I'm going to do my normal military aid news. I thought I'd do a live today just because really there's quite a bit to talk about and I've missed having a chat to you guys. And here's a special hello to Pierre Dupont, who I went around Ukraine with twice. He's watching live from Glastonbury. So it's all right for some. My days of Glastonbury, I went to Glastonbury Festival, I don't know, 3 times back in the 90s, early 2000s. 95 was the first time I went. I didn't pay a single time. That was in days where you could climb under the fence. And yeah, then they made the fences better. And yeah, so but that meant that there were twice as many people in Glastonbury than you get now. But it's absolutely incredible Glastonbury. Love a bit of festival me. Right, okay. Those days are long gone though. I'd need a wheelchair to get around, and that's never happened. Right, okay. We have NATO taking place at the moment, the NATO summit, and it is it's pretty interesting. There's some quite a variety of comments coming out from there, which are definitely worth talking about. Hello to Grandad Guitar from Stoke-on-Trent. Good to have you on board. So we're going to go to NATO first before then looking at all the different sort of packages and aid that's going to Ukraine, as we normally do. I might have to sort of react a little bit live to what's going on as well, because it's all sort of happening now. I think Trump and Zelensky at the time of me speaking right now are chatting, are having their meeting at the NATO summit, which is taking place in The Hague in the Netherlands. So EU countries and Canada will provide Ukraine. So this is not NATO per se, but it's coming from the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. EU countries and Canada will provide Ukraine with $35 billion euros in military aid in 2025, says NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. If Russia attacks us today, our response will be devastating. We still believe that Ukraine's path to NATO is irreversible. I presume he's talking about just Europe and Canada, unless he really is talking about NATO being, you know, Europe and Canada plus the US, but the US aren't really helping with any aid. So it's interesting because there's another number, which is this. It's safe to assume that last number, that okay, right, so maybe this is meaning that 2025 they will have given, by the end of 2025, $35 billion euros of aid to Ukraine. And then he said it's safe to assume that military aid to Ukraine this year will exceed last year's 50 billion. Oh, no, I'm not quite sure. So, okay, this may be talking about NATO then now. $50 billion, which is going to be still going to be more than 35 billion euros. So there's a couple of numbers floating around there. The point being that they're going to give more to Ukraine, which is fantastic. That's exactly what they need. Indeed, Zelensky's come out and said, you know, a number of times recently, as he often does, you know, what they need, and they need a lot of investment in the military industrial base because they can produce an awful lot of their own stuff. Okay, let's look at Timothy Milovanov's useful summary of what's going on here. So this is Mark Rutte speaking, I think at a defense forum yesterday, not at NATO today. Yeah, the defense industry forum there. So this is not NATO, but very close to. We're producing more ships, planes, and ammo than in decades. NATO power is boosting cooperation and innovation. Ursula von der Leyen said we're launching Rearm Europe plan to mobilize 650 billion in defense investment. That seems to be going okay at the moment, organizationally. Rutte then says we've opened hundreds of new production lines and expanded existing ones. The 2030 plan will unlock up to 800 billion. So this is a European rearm plan. 800 billion euros for defense. Strong defense needs a strong industry. EU industry needs a strong transatlantic bond. We must break barriers and push for transatlantic cooperation. Of course, a lot of the NATO meeting today is making sure that the US is on board, and that's a good time to have a sidebar here. So, as you know, Trump, for better or for worse, published the personal message from Mark Rutte to Trump yesterday, and it was cringe. It was full-on cringe, where Mark Rutte was fawning over Trump. Some of you it was split in my thread. Some of you are saying this is disgusting. Mark Rutte should never have said blah 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 blah, and others like this is absolutely perfect. Mark Rutte, this is true to form. It's what he did when he was the leader of the Netherlands, which is manipulate people into doing what he wanted them to do. And he's pretty slippery himself, Mark Rutte, so on and so forth. I fall in the latter camp. So it was cringe. What he said was cringe, but it was functional. He has to get Trump on board. Like, I know, and sometimes I'm like this, which is screw the US, screw them. We can do this alone. We don't need their help. That Trump is being really annoying, X, Y, and Z. But on the other hand, actually, the US are insanely important, and they have such a massive military and huge military expenditure that no one else can help in the same way that the US can help. And it's just as simple as that. And there are also technical things that they can do that no one else can do. So we really do need the US to be on board. So that, that leaves broadly two options for European leaders, which is, do they say, well, screw you, Trump, we're going to do this ourselves, and then become abrasive towards Trump? Or do they try and acquiesce and fawn over him in a way that he has his ego massaged and he comes on board? And if you go for the former, then you're just going to piss Trump off, and he will either just entrench more in isolationism, or even join with Russia to a greater extent, and that becomes extremely counterproductive. So unfortunately, it's the other option, which is just say incredibly cringeworthy things to Trump and make sure that he thinks that everyone absolutely thinks he's a bee's knees. That's what Mark Rutte did. So what he said is cringeworthy, and I would struggle to write anything like that myself with my beliefs about Trump. Mark Rutte probably thinks very similarly about Trump as I do in reality, but he's being very manipulative, you could say. And it appears that, at least so far, it's done the trick. Trump is being more congenial at NATO than we've seen him be for an awful long time. And so that's, I think, good news. Right, just to continue from the forum from yesterday, Rutte said, we'll launch a plan to invest 5% of GDP in defense. That's now been signed up to at NATO. This will deliver a major defense dividend and fuel economic growth. It means millions of jobs across both sides of the Atlantic. Ursula von der Leyen added, we need to spot defense startup unicorns early and direct more public and private capital their way. That's an advantage the US has over EU. It's long been thought in terms of tech or anything. There are a lot of startups in Europe. There's a lot of great innovation in its early form. But what happens is the US is much better for sort of venture capitalism and taking those startups and transforming them into something, tangible and effective and funded. And so you get a lot of movement of these ideas from Europe over to the US, and then the US reaps the rewards because of their much better funding. They end up having these amazing tech companies and whatnot. What the EU needs to do much better, and the UK and other countries, is compete on that funding level. And that's what she's saying here. I think that this is a really important point. You need to spot defense startup unicorns early and direct more public and private capital their way. Europe is full of innovators. They should find everything they need to succeed right here at home. Just stop them going to the US and keep them there. And then that makes you money. But also, if they're in the defense sector, then it keeps that kind of sense of national security and defense security within Europe. Von der Leyen also said Europe must have all it needs for deterrence, the goal of readiness 2030, which is the rearm 2030, although I think they're trying to call it something else now because people didn't like it sounded a bit bellicose, rearm 2030. So readiness 2030, it demands a new mindset. We must leave our comfort zones and unite tech with defense, civilian with military across Europe and beyond. And she then says, finally, I'm impressed how Ukraine, while fighting for survival, built a defense industry, UAVs and ballistic missiles from scratch in just 3.5 years. They've become world leaders in drone innovation. Russia is learning too, and we must not underestimate that. Absolutely. Right on both points. Interesting that Antonio Costa has also said, from an EU point of view, that Ukraine has absolutely jumped through all the hoops that Europe has asked them, or the EU has asked them, in order to accede to the EU. And during wartime, that's just been incredibly impressive. So it looks like the Ukrainians are ahead of the game there. They're really doing well in doing everything that's required of them to get into the EU. Okay, so Ukraine can produce 8 million drones annually, but needs funding, Zelensky says. He argued that Ukraine's defense capabilities are not only key to defending its own territory, but essential to strengthening NATO's long-term security. So this Defense Industry Forum is at the NATO summit. This was yesterday's thing, and then today all the leaders are meeting. But yeah, so it can produce 8 million drones annually. The last I heard, they are planning on manufacturing 5 million drones. So there is a capacity gap there where they can potentially build an awful lot of stuff. They just need to match that with the funding. So the potential of our defense production exceeds $44 billion. This is almost 1,000 military equipment, from artillery to, I don't know what that means, 1,000 military equipment, from artillery to advanced drones, missiles, but about 40% of the entire potential does not have proper funding. This is a problem. So in other words, they need a whole bunch more funding in order to match their capacity, what they're able to produce. So Ukrainian weapons will become part of a strong Europe, says Zelensky. We hope that European Security Initiative, which includes 150 billion euros, will be actively used as the next resource to support our common security. What he's referring to is the 150 billion initial funding available to EU nations through the Readiness 2030 initiative. He says, well, hopefully, Ukraine will see some of that in terms of, because at the end of the day, that investment is for European security, and essentially, Ukraine is the front line of European security. Yeah, and there's a lot to be said about Ukraine being in NATO. Some people say that, some people see it, if they're being critical, is Ukraine desperate to join NATO for their own kind of benefit. But more and more people at the moment are saying, just like with Finland and Sweden joining NATO, they add to NATO. There are capabilities and capacities that those nations bring to NATO, and expertise. That means it's not just, NATO isn't just for them, but they are for NATO. The same with Ukraine. People are seeing Ukraine as being able to bring to NATO. NATO benefits from Ukraine being in there. It's not just NATO as a thing to protect Ukraine, but actually NATO can be, Ukraine can be in NATO to help protect all of the NATO nations. They bring with them the most experienced European army, possibly the most experienced army in the world, and all of their defense innovation that they've been carrying out over the last 3 years. They're going to bring that to NATO. NATO gains from having Ukraine in it, and that's a really important way to frame it. Okay, to continue now. Good old what do we say? Moff Toadkin. So Grand Moff Toadkin here says Putin is not the main threat. We are stronger. The real danger is losing our position in global trade, says Viktor Orban, a sidekick of Vladimir Putin at the NATO summit. Of course, he's going to say something as ridiculous as that. And indeed, this is him talking. NATO has no business in Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, neither is Russia. And my job is to keep it as it is. Yes, of course. Right. Whatever. Yeah, seeing him at the NATO summit just makes me retch into my mouth. Right. Or whatever. NATO has sent Ukraine almost $43 million for satellite comms for the Ukrainian armed forces, according to, I presume, the Ukrainian MOD. Ukraine has joined key NATO initiatives in the field of communications, command and control, and computer technologies. In addition, equipment is provided and training is conducted to strengthen air defense. And then we'll get on to this. So this is... what happened last night is Trump was on the plane on the way to NATO, and he was questioned as often. So I don't know what it is about Trump. Like he decides so often, he's like, oh, I'm going to get interviewed now. I'm going to stand by jet engine. So he stands outside a plane next to the jet engine. And this seemed to happen from Trump 1.0, where he'd stand by the jet engine or stand by the presidential helicopter. And you're like, everyone's having to shout over the noise, and he gets to shout. And I don't know what it is, why he does that. There must be some kind of reason. If he gets a difficult question, maybe you can pretend he can't hear it. But anyway, the other thing he does is he just comes out the toilet door on Air Force One and then gives interviews there, where it looks like he does. It looks like he's just, oh, give it 5 minutes, guys. Anyway, what questions? And then proceeds to be asked about everything. He's obviously not just walked out the toilet door, but you get my point. So here he is last night saying what was completely, potentially highly controversial. And okay, the question, are you still committed to Article 5 of NATO? Answer, it depends on your definition. I'm committed to being their friend. Wow. Okay, so this caused a lot of consternation, and rightly so. It actually made me think whether he knew what Article 5 was. I looked at this and thought, maybe he's just fudging it. It depends on your definition. I mean, that's a philosopher's answer. No, what's your view on this? Well, it depends what you mean by the words that you have said. I mean, that's always what I say. One of my sons gets so frustrated. I have these arguments with Oscar or discussions, and he'll like, I want a yes or no, like, because he sees things so black and white. It's like, yes or no, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I can't answer that because actually there's an issue there's not a yes or no. And then he goes absolutely nuts. But it's always like, well, what do you mean by this word that you're using here to ask me this? Because we might be meaning different things, etc., etc. But anyway, so he says, it depends on your definition. I'm committed to being their friend. Okay. That looks fairly similar to either, I don't know what Article 5 is, so flub, 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 or I don't want to commit to Article 5, so I'll just say I'll be their friends. In which case, NATO is now defunct. I mean, the whole point of NATO is Article 5. Really, that's the main crux of the whole organization. It's all for one and one for all. So then he was asked about that, obviously, as you would expect today, because there needs some clarification on this. Mr. President, the questioner says, you said you would clarify your stance on Article 5 just yesterday. Is that something you can explain today? Trump says, I stand with it. That's why I'm here. If I didn't stand with it, I wouldn't be here. Which is right. I mean, like, if you don't have Article 5, you don't have NATO. So to a degree, he's right there. He's still a bit like not quite, I stand with it. Okay, so I would assume then that if Article 5 was invoked, the US would come to the aid of a NATO nation. You bloody hope so. I mean, that's really the whole point. But it's still like, I stand with it. Yeah. Okay. Right now, as it's this NATO summit going on, there have been a lot of packages being announced and all sorts. I just want to see if there's anything else that's coming out of the NATO summit that's worthy of mention first. Ukraine's part of NATO is irreversible, says Mark Rutte. This is really good to hear. And of course, it's different to the American rhetoric because the Americans are saying very formally, very explicitly that they can't see Ukraine being part of NATO. Our resounding message to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people is that Ukraine has our continued support, including with over 35 billion euros pledged so far this year. Right, so that's the understanding of the amount, the monies, is that 35 billion is what's been pledged so far in 2025, but it's going to be over 50 billion by the end, which will be more than last year or something like that. Okay. But the idea that there's an irreversible path to NATO, I think, is great to hear from Mark Rutte. Okay, so we now have the start of the packages, and we're going to actually start with European officials, according to the Washington Post, are exploring alternative options for purchasing American weapons for Ukraine in case the Trump administration does not approve new deliveries. This is something we've heard time and time again since January the 20th, and since Ukraine has not been receiving any further aid packages from the US other than that which was approved through USAI funding and whatnot. so orders from the industry that was paid for during Biden's tenure. But there's been no new orders as far as I can work out. I think there might be $50 million of something going back some time. But other than that, essentially nothing has been ordered and no further presidential drawdown authority being utilized. So the PDA, if you remember, as many of us will know, is the presidential drawdown authority that gives the US the ability to draw down from their stockpiles of weapons. They're not ordering new ones. That's the USAI funding. PDA is drawing down from their own weapons and giving them to Ukraine, and then to the book value of that equipment. But it's often old equipment that's already been bought and paid for, so it's not costing anything. But then they say, look, this is $100 million of missiles, and actually these might be old missiles that they've been paid for. It depends, if you're going to replace them and what you're going to replace them with and how much that would cost is really the case. But anyway, then they're not spending that 3.8 billion left over. And Hegseth was asked about this the other day, and he said, yeah, I'm aware we've got it. So he was asked directly at this Senate hearing, and he's like, I'm aware we've got the $4 billion odd dollars of PDA. It's something that we can use in the future. So he didn't answer the question of when. When are you going to use that? Oh, it's something that we can use. Yeah, we know that. I know it's something you can use. When are you going to use it? You didn't answer it. Anyway, so the Ukrainians really want US equipment because there are certain things they can't get from anywhere else. And at the moment, Trump is not selling anything to Ukraine. It seems insane. Like if I was Lockheed Martin or Raytheon in the US, I'd be pulling my hair out. I'd be going nuts at the Trump administration. It's like we are losing. I mean, they're doing, I'm sure, very well at the moment, but it's like there is so much potential sales that we are losing to Ukraine. Anyway, the Allies are hoping to persuade Washington to sell weapons to Kyiv for cash or through credit schemes. However, the final decision will depend on the position of the US president, of course. As the sources explain, representatives of the Trump administration are wary of steps that could complicate the normalization of relations with Russia. Even in the case of refusal, the US will continue to support Ukraine in the form of intelligence sharing and logistical assistance, including the transportation of heavy weapons. So that's really good news. Even in the case of refusal, the US will continue to support Ukraine in the form of intelligence sharing and logistical assistance, including transportation of heavy weapons. Now, that is an important statement there. Now, this has come from Max 25 and doesn't always put his sources. I know this is Washington Post, but sometimes summarizes things in not quite the most accurate ways, but that's good. European countries are theoretically capable of compensating for most of the deliveries, and that's true as well. So it really is just a case of the US has more and stuff that's readily available rather than stuff that the Europeans want to give a bunch of equipment to Ukraine, then they invariably have to build it. I think they've given most of their stuff that they've got ready to give. Whereas the Americans have got huge. I mean, they could just give 500 Bradleys right now, and it wouldn't touch the size of the American resort. They've got thousands and thousands of them sitting in these big open, I'd say fields, so not fields, big open desert areas in Arizona and places. Yeah, so the US are really important. Europe can theoretically provide a lot of the stuff, but not all of the stuff. Now, this whole thing about Patriots. So we just been learning that Ukraine wants to buy a bunch of stuff, and they want to buy Patriots. He said, what was it, $50 billion worth of kit that they'd want to buy, and you can bet your bottom dollar that a lot of that's going to be Patriot Interceptor missiles and Patriot systems. PAC-3 systems that can take down ballistic missiles. Now, apparently, Patriot batted 1,000 today, says Tyler Wrongway. So apparently, Patriots did very well taking out stuff, I think, in Qatar, a lot and just in the Middle East recently as a result of what's going on with the Houthis and also with the Iranians. So the Patriots have been doing well, but they've been doing well, by all accounts, on the back of the war in Ukraine and what they're learning from Ukraine. So a lot of software improvements for Patriots have come out of the war in Ukraine, says Rogaway. Saudi's defense against the Houthis as well. But I've been told Ukraine was a huge leap. Mounds of constant data from real engagements are used to tweak the system. So Malcontent News finds this so infuriating, as do I. It's really bloody annoying, this, because, okay, here he lays it out like this. US 2022, Patriot is too complicated for Ukraine. US in 2023, Patriots won't be highly effective against short-range ballistic missiles and aero ballistic missiles, but they'll help a lot. Ukraine in 2023, we yeeted KH-47M2 Kinzhaos, so the hypersonic dagger missiles. They've actually been, Patriots have been really successful against them, and railed Iskander-Ms. US said, what? US then says, holy crap, that's impressive. Can we collaborate? And Ukraine said, of course. And then in 2024, the US says, meh, we need our Patriots. And then in 2025 says, sucks to be you. We're not giving you any Patriots. And then US in Qatar in 2025 goes 100% on nailing Iranian short-range ballistic missiles using the lessons learned in blood by Ukrainians. And the US then say, we did this all by ourselves. We are so amazing. Tongue in cheek and whatnot. But that must be galling for the Ukrainians. Like, we, and this is the point. I make this point so bloody often to you guys, which is, this is not a free lunch for the Ukrainians. When the US or Europe or Canada or Australia or whoever give weapons to Ukraine or sell them or whatever, however they get the stuff to Ukraine, there are loads of advantages that the donor gets. The feedback from these weapons being used on the front line is incredibly important. The advertising of this stuff to the outside world, that means orders fly in for the stuff, especially if it's still being manufactured and whatnot. The tactics that the Ukrainians are using to do things that you can then get a window into, and you can see what works and what doesn't work, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these feedback loops that you can apply to the continued development of your weapons systems and your tactics, so that you as a nation and your armed forces are in a much better position. We are learning so much from the Ukrainians, and yet it's so frustrating to say, to hear. And again, I don't want to be too like, oh, anti-Trump, but, you know, to hear him go, we've given you $500 billion worth of stuff, which is wrong. Okay, $300 billion, which is wrong. It's all like the wrong numbers, but also as if like it was all charity. No, it was to the strategic benefit. I mean, you want them to win because you want them to win for your own foreign policy strategy and your understanding of how the world should be. So even if you got none of that feedback loop and all the other stuff I've just been mentioning, like you're giving this stuff to Ukraine so that they can prevail against Russia, and Russia are your strategic enemies here. So you get all that, and you get all the other benefits, those secondary benefits I was talking about. So that it's really frustrating when it's like, yeah, well, not only are we not going to give you anything else, then we demand payment for what we did give you, as it previously was. Hopefully that won't be the case anymore. The idea that they want payment back for the I haven't heard that from the Americans for a few weeks now, but you never know. Right, Special Kherson Cat here says the Netherlands is to produce 600,000 drones for Ukraine under a 500 million euro deal. The Dutch Defense Minister Brekkelmans has announced the signing of contracts for the production of 600,000 drones destined for Ukraine, funding through a $500 million euro aid package. And of course, the other advantage that I always say, but neglected to say just then, is the economic stimulus for making a bunch of stuff in your own country, and, you know, jobs, tax, revenue, etc., economic stimulus. And here we have 600,000 drones being made in the Netherlands to be sent out to Ukraine. So that's something I want to talk about when we come to talk about what Denmark is doing, because it looks like the Danish are taking their Danish model and then readapting it back to indigenous production, which doesn't surprise me, but we'll get there in a second. So we'll stay with the Dutch here. Good old Dutch. 100 small air surveillance radars for use against drones. That's illustrative. It doesn't necessarily look like that. There's a bit of, they've been pledged by the Dutch. So good news there as well. Right, then we're on to Denmark. Right. So Jeff 2146 says this. Slight difference of opinion on how this works with the next source. But he says Denmark and Ukraine have signed a letter of intent to localize the production of Ukrainian weapon systems. But then it says in Denmark, normally localization of weapon systems is to localize the manufacture of them in Ukraine. That's the Danish model. So remember, there are three options here. The reason I'm going to re-explain this to you is because Denmark might be going back to another version. So the best thing for a nation to do, it depends totally on what your metrics of success are. Because one, you want Ukraine to do as well as possible and get the most out of the weapons they're gonna eventually get. But two, you want to stimulate your own economy. So if you're stimulating your own economy is well up there on your metrics of success, then one, you give Ukraine your own manufactured military equipment. That's the best thing. They get kit, they can win the war, and that kit is you producing that kit, so you're stimulating your economy. Second best thing is you take the money you would spend here on your own stuff to send to Ukraine, and you give that directly to Ukraine. Now, the benefit that has for Ukraine is that A, it gives them jobs in Ukraine, and that generates tax revenue in Ukraine, but then you're not generating the tax revenue in your own country, right? So it's more beneficial for Ukraine, less beneficial for the donor country, but it can get extra beneficial for Ukraine because they can make that stuff cheaper most often. So, for example, with the Caesars, they can make like two Bogdana 2S22 self-propelled guns for the same price as the French can make one Caesar. And the Caesar is good and it'll be better than a Bogdana, but it's probably not going to be twice as good. They prefer to have two Bogdanas than one Caesar. I can pretty much guarantee. So you've got that. And then the third option is to take that money and spend it somewhere completely separate. Like we're going to spend it in the US buying Patriots for Ukraine. But if you're Denmark, right, you're not getting stimulus. Ukraine's not getting a stimulus. The US is getting a stimulus. So you're spending your money in the US. It's not staying in Europe. It's not staying in the EU if you're an EU nation. It's not staying in your own country. It's not staying in Ukraine. Okay, so there are your three options. Denmark originally exhausted their own military manufacturing capacities for the stuff that they were making and giving to Ukraine. Then they gave all of their artillery to Ukraine because they're like, we're only going to use this against the Russians. So there's no point in us having this artillery if the Ukrainians are using it against the Russians now. So they gave everything to the Ukrainians. But in terms of building their own stuff, they've kind of exhausted their options there. So it looks like so they went to the Danish model, which is the second one, which is invest directly into Ukraine. But now it looks like they're going back to try and make stuff in their own country. So this memorandum of this letter of memorandum of understanding seems to indicate that they're going to make weapons in Denmark. So it's not like the localization could be relocalizing Ukrainian drones and localizing the manufacture in Denmark, which will be used by the Ukrainian armed forces. Denmark has, for its part, already allocated 500 million kroner, 67 million euros to kickstart this initiative. Okay, so someone else explains it in this way. Ukraine and Denmark signed a deal to launch joint weapons production. Denmark pledged 67 million to start Ukrainian defense manufacturing on its soil, the first step of the Build with Ukraine initiative. But I have a feeling that this is then going to, so weapons of Ukraine production will be manufactured on the territory of Denmark, said the Minister of Defense. Denmark has already allocated around $80 million to launch a program and launch a defense enterprise under the Build with Ukraine program. So I'm guessing that the Danish are saying, right, we can't just keep, or we don't want to keep pouring money directly into Ukraine because our economy is not seeing enough of the benefit of that. And while that is good for Ukraine, and they can arguably get more equipment for more bang for your buck, we need to. This is taxpayers' money, so we need to, show some benefit more directly to the taxpayer. So I have a feeling here, and I'm speculating a lot, that the Danish are going, right, we're now going to. It could be that we don't build this stuff, but we're going to now start building this stuff, and we're going to pour in a whole bunch of initiative funding in order to start a building program for Danish equipment in Denmark for Ukraine. So says Ukrainska Pravda, factory for producing Ukrainian drones will be, so the localization, it's weird. Instead of localizing, like I was saying earlier, normally localization or production localization means building, I don't know, like an L117 BAE Systems howitzer, if that's the right number, in Ukraine. So BAE Systems says we're going to localize production in Ukraine, Rheinmetall as well. We're going to take Ukrainian stuff and we're going to localize production in Denmark. So you guys build some awesome drones. There's a picture of a shark drone there. And we're going to start building them in Denmark and then get them to you. It may be that they get some license fees for that as well, the Ukrainians, but they certainly get a bunch of drones that they would like. So Copenhagen is set to invest in the production of Ukrainian drones on Danish territory as part of the Build with Ukraine initiative. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov and Danish counterparts have signed a letter of intent to formalize the arrangement. The Build with Ukraine initiative provides for the development of Ukrainian weapons production in partner countries. Now, we've seen, I think, Spain are producing a Ukrainian vehicle, I think, as well. There are a number of countries who have done this on a small scale, I think, so far. New facilities funded by foreign governments will exclusively serve the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. London's also committed to financing Ukrainian drone production on UK soil for 3 years under this initiative. So it looks like the UK is doing that as well. Okay. The Netherlands, as mentioned, stepped up. So, yeah, I've got that in the wrong place. Now I couldn't work out with the Dutch. I'm going to go back to the Dutch here. Sorry, it is in the wrong place. But this Dutch one, I couldn't work out. It was 500 million and then another lot. So the Netherlands steps up. Dick Schoof says NATO will soon unveil a major support package for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Dutch acting defense minister confirms a new 175 million military aid package, including drones and radar systems, on top of the 500 million committed for those 600,000 drones. So yeah, it could well be that's another Dutch package. Okay, now on to the Brits. Ukraine and the UK launch a project to jointly produce drones. So this looks like exactly what the Danish are doing. Defense Minister Umerov announced for the first 3 years, the UK will fund a wide range of Ukrainian-designed drones to be built on British soil, all going to Ukraine's defense during the war. Afterward, production will be shared. So this is an attempt to make sure that the money, we talked about this, the UK talked about this in the, partly to do with the strategic defense review, but also in terms of giving aid to Ukraine. Keir Starmer is selling the idea to the public that this is about stimulating British, the economy and giving jobs to Brits and whatnot. So, that there's this need, I think, this perceived need to make sure that people understand that it's not just money going out of the taxpayer coffers straight to Ukraine, that actually this is an investment in the UK as well as an investment in Ukraine. So we are to send as well 350 air defense missiles to Ukraine, funded by $70 million, pounds, goodness me, too many bloody currencies, funded by £70 million in interest from frozen Russian assets. It's the first time the UK used Russia-linked cash is paying for weapons. So in other words, the profits that are being derived from frozen Russian assets held in the UK are being used to directly pay for weapons from the UK. These will be AMRAAM weapons going to Ukraine, and I'll show you the system, the Raven system that we talked about before, but just to remind you that they'll be fired from. Russia should foot the bill for Putin's war, said Starmer. Absolutely right. UK military aid this year has been £4.5 billion. Okay, so first use of that direct funding to buy weapons. So the UK will send 350 ASRAAMs, air defense missiles, adapted to in record time for ground launch. The missiles will be deployed through UK supplied Raven systems, 5 more of which are en route to Ukraine, taking the total to 13. So these are these Super Cats chassis, I think, with these ASRAAMs, sorry, would normally be used, I presume, in the air-to-air it's an air-to-air missile, so usually be used on a plane to fire at another plane. Like I've said to you many times before, you can use these from the surface, but the problem is, or the disadvantage is that they won't have nearly as much range because you have to fire them. They have from from a static position, whereas when you fire a missile from a jet, you're already going crazy miles an hour firing your missile, so it's already got that speed, and then it just needs to get up to a little bit more speed to hunt down the plane that you're shooting at. Whereas you're firing it from the ground, it has to get up to the altitude, so it has to use all the fuel to get up to the altitude. It has to fight gravity to do so. So the plane is already up there. You're having to send this missile up there from the ground, and it's going from a standing start. So all of that means that it uses up an awful lot of energy, an awful lot of fuel, therefore, to get up to where it needs to be and to the speed it needs to be. So the range for these will not be nearly as much as if they were fired from a jet, but these apparently have been very useful. It's the same for all the surface-to-air missiles, obviously. Now, France and Germany will increase support for the armed forces of Ukraine and jointly invest in the Ukrainian defense industry. Financial Times states citing Merz and Macron. So again, further increasing support from France and Germany there. Zelensky and Macron discussed increasing the supply of Mirage jets. This is one of the things I go to bed at night thinking about so often, which is like, oh, how many jets could France give now? Could they give some more? What would, even if they had 4 jets, I just have these like images of jets flying around the sky in my head as I go to sleep. It's literally one of my rituals. But I keep thinking that more Mirages need to go. The 2005F Mirage planes that the French are using, that would be super cool. So they've talked about this. And also launching a joint production of Interceptor drones to protect Ukraine's civilian infrastructure from Russian mass attacks. Special focus was given to countering Iranian-made drones used by Russia against Ukrainian cities. So these Interceptor drones are certainly something at the forefront of the Ukrainians' minds at the moment. It looks like there could be a joint co-production of that. And that could be the same kind of model we've just been talking about with regard to Denmark and the UK, taking Ukrainian interceptor drones that have been designed by Ukraine, have been proven to work. They just need to... So remember, Zelensky earlier was saying, we've got this extra capacity. We can build this stuff. We just need you to give us that extra money. And the Europeans are like going, yeah, okay, we can try and do that. But we can also build that stuff that you're talking about, the exact Ukrainian stuff that you're saying there's that gap, funding gap. We can build some of that, but we want to build it back here. Rather than give you the money, we're going to build it back here and create the jobs ourselves. So it looks to be that that's what a lot of nations are doing. So they might not buy that. They might not manufacture that stuff already, but they're ramping up manufacturing lines of this new equipment, but back at home. France and Poland are continuously adapting their training courses, apparently, to the demands of their Ukrainian partners. This is important. There were some complaints about this. There have been right throughout the war that the NATO training they've received from these different countries are training them, Poland, France, Germany, the UK, that they haven't been adapted enough to the needs of the Ukrainians. The complete focus on drone warfare. These are areas of warfare that none of our troops have been used to dealing with. So how are we going to train the Ukrainians on drone warfare? So there needs to be a huge and continual sort of adaptation process going on with the training of these troops. And apparently, according to French Aid to Ukraine, the Polish and French are continually adapting at the moment their training, which is good news. Germany will finance the production of the deep strike drone, the Lyuti drone, for Ukraine with a 3-digit million sum. So some are saying hundreds of millions of euros of funding for the Lyuti. There has been this talk about Germany funding distance munitions, and whether that includes the Hrim 2 ballistic missile that they're producing, that apparently they're now scaling, according to Zelensky. We don't know. There was lots of speculation that the Germans were going to help to fund that, but then you heard almost straight away that after they'd announced the funding of these long distance munitions, that they talked about the Luty and the Bars drone. Then it went to, and yeah, we're thinking missiles are in on this as well, but certainly we're now back to the Luty drone. I presume the Germans are helping with the FRIM too. They need ballistic missiles, the Ukrainians for sure, and cruise missiles. It was stated that with the allocated funds, Ukraine will be able to produce several hundred combat drones. Wow, that seems like they're pretty expensive, these drones, because that looks like they're almost $1 million a pop, given the amount there. But yeah. Kongsberg, so the Norwegian manufacturer of the NASAMS air defense system, Kongsberg Defense and Aerospace (KDA), together with the Ukrainian partners, have signed a memorandum of understanding to develop a new air defense missile for NASAMS. A new missile. The missiles are to be cheaper than currently available options and will primarily be used against drones. The problem is that they're no doubt using these would be developed initially for use against aircraft, right? So the NASAMS, I presume the design of the NASAMS is probably like 2 decades old now. It's been manufactured between the Americans and the Norwegians. But drones are a relatively new thing in terms of the variety of the drones. Yeah, okay, MQ-9 Reaper drones and whatnot have been around for some time. And these, I guess, are designed to take out those sort of drones. But now with the proliferation of these one-way attack drones, as opposed to the Reaper drones, you'd be flying out, sending off some missiles or doing some reconnaissance and then getting it back to base. But these one-way attack drones, these kamikaze drones, are a relatively new thing. And if you're using the sort of missile that you used to take down a Su-27 or whatever, to take down these much cheaper drones, then there's going to be an asymmetry there, and you're going to be expending an awful lot of money defending against these one-way attack drones. So it's good to see that they're producing a cheaper missile, particularly for these Shahid-style drones. Development of these is being financed by Norway. On a personal note, he says, Jeff2146, I expect this to be something in the same vein of the FZ-123, but fired from a new launcher integrated into the NASAMS system, rather than a new missile that is compatible with the existing NASAMS launchers. A bit of technical speak there from him. Okay, aerospace giant Airbus is to train Ukrainian specialists in aircraft maintenance. As part of the deal, Airbus will send representatives to Ukraine to train local specialists who will then become certified instructors for aircraft maintenance. That's really good. So that will help out with, no doubt, the general maintenance. I presume that's not for particular airframes. That's kind of a generic aircraft maintenance qualification or whatever. But Airbus being involved there, that sounds really good. Airbus being sort of a European conglomerate, French, British. So yeah, good to see them get involved. Italy's committed $1.6 million to boost Ukraine's battle against landmines. Ukraine's reduced its mined territory by over 20% since late 2022. Wow. But around 137,000 square kilometers, much of it farmland, remains hazardous, according to the State Emergency Service. So Italy helping out a tad with that. And then Ukraine has begun serial production of its new ballistic missile, the Sapsan. That's what it's called in its export form. It's the HRIM-2, the Thunder 2. Andriy Yermak announced this. He's the Ukrainian President's Office head. Quote, we will surprise enemy more than once, he added. I bloody hope so. It has already struck a Russian military target 300 kilometers from launch. So a little bit more detail there, starting to say, they said they tested it in August. They said they tested it, I think, since then. We don't quite know what it's been tested on, but the claim here is that it has been fired 300 kilometers to hit a military target. And if they can scale them up, then it really is so important. As soon as they had scaled up ballistic missile usage, I think that's a game changer. If Ukraine are able to send something like, I don't know, 10 ballistic missiles at 300 kilometers every day, that's a game changer in my book. If you can suddenly take out, and if they can, as has been hinted, increase the range of that to say 500 kilometers, if you start looking at all the air bases in that region, it's like, yep, goodbye air bases. Bosh, bosh, bosh. got to do that. Just pick an airbase a night and then overwhelm it with ballistic missiles and as many drones as you can send. Right, Ukrainian interceptor drones, the Strela and the Brewery can, the Strela can reach speeds of up to 350 kilometers an hour and destroy Russian Garand drones. So these are your interceptor drones that are being built, and some of them, a lot of them, seem to look like this. Or this one in particular, I've seen another one, a green version of this. I think Wild Hornets might make it, and yeah, they have this odd design. That is very different from other drones. They look like a kind of just a spaceship with accentuated fins and whatnot. The Brewery is designed to shoot down Russian Zalas and Orlans and Supercam intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance drones. So there has been a real flurry of activity in the industry concerning interceptor drones. Zelensky said the other day, that's a small version of it, actually. Zelensky said the other day that there were sort of 4 companies that have done a really good job or were working hard at this. 2 were particularly successful, he was saying. So interceptor drones, that's where it's at. Now, Mark Carney here I want to play you this, actually. I think it's worth listening to this. So I got to put it on another browser to play it for you. Mark Carney is saying the right things. It was a really good interview he gave to Christiana Amanpour from CNN, where he was talking about Ukraine and even the United States as well, and 51st state and all this kind of stuff. But here, let's just find it. There we go. Okay. So, as Coffee Time News says, I love it when Carney smirks and takes a drink of water while the reporter is in the middle of the question. He knows what he's doing, as old Carney, by the looks of it. So hopefully you can hear this. Ouch. So this was in response to Trump calling out Carney for not spending enough on defense as a percentage of GDP. And of course, Canada have just come out with big plans to really up their defense spending. They know that they've not spent enough for a good long time. I would humbly, and the idea that that Trump's got a better handle on how much these guys are planning on spending is what Carney has an issue with. I would humbly suggest that the Secretary of NATO is more up to speed on the numbers than the President of the United States. In other words, Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. We are spending a lot more on defense, and that is going to go to 2% and then above. There was no sound on Carney. Why was there no sound on Carney? That's really irritating. Oh well, why there should be sound. That's really irritating. Did I put the wrong? Was I playing the wrong one? What's going on there? I'm going to make sure that damn what happens now is going to happen. I'm going to play it. It's going to happen, guys. Sorry, I was playing the wrong one. Let's present this one, and we are going to have. There it is. Is that the one? Yeah, here we are. Right. You're going to hear him now, aren't you? Please say you can hear him.
President Trump criticized Canada again today on defense spending, called Canada a low payer or just about the lowest. How will you approach that at the upcoming NATO summit where defense spending increase is expected to be on the table?
Well, I would take note of the very strong endorsement by the Secretary General of NATO of our defense spending, of our defense investment plan. and have been put in place. And I would humbly suggest that I think the Secretary General of NATO is probably more up to speed on the numbers than the President of the United States.
I'd humbly suggest that Mark Rutte knows what he's talking about and Trump doesn't. But it's this smirk he has, and when he takes his drink there, and he seems to be pretty good at that. Mark Carney, I've said this before, and I don't know whether my Canadian viewers will agree with me, but I feel Canada's in a safe pair of hands, really. With him, he's not going to set the world on fire. He's just quietly competent, knows what he's doing, and I think will be supportive of Ukraine, but also I think a good pair of hands for the Canadian economy and for Canada as a whole, and is probably fairly well placed to deal with Trump. I think a lot of people want leaders to stand up to Trump big time, but the problem is, if you stand up to Trump and show too much spine, then Trump is retributive, and so he will take it out on you, even if it's not in the best interests of the United States. Trump is petty like that, and so I think this is why you saw Mark Rutte say what he had to say. This is why these nations play this game of fawning over Trump, and it's annoying to us. It's annoying to me because I want people to just stand up to Trump and tell him where to go. But actually, that can be counterproductive, because you end up, being strong. Trump might back down a bit, but he will hate you for it. If you're too successful in making Trump look like a fool in public. So it's a horrible game to play, isn't it? Having to be obsequious to Donald Trump. But yeah, I don't know, because sometimes I advocate for just, come on guys, sort it out, screw Trump. Yeah, right, okay. He is indeed there are so many great nicknames for him, aren't there? Mango Mussolini being one of my favorites. Orange shit gibbon was but anyway, right, moving on to Austria. Moving on to Russian subjects here in terms of military aid. So, although this is to do with aid to Ukraine, but it's been halted. So Serbia has apparently now halted all arms exports to Ukraine amid Russian scrutiny over Ukraine. This is really annoying, because I was saying the other day that Serbia still appeared to be providing aid to Ukraine, even though in public they're saying, just like Slovakia, no, it's not the right thing to do. We don't want to help Ukraine overtly, politically with military aid, but on the side, but by the way, we're happy to sell you as much stuff as you can buy, type thing. So Serbia was still happily selling stuff, but Russia obviously have their fingers in a lot of Serbian pies, and the FSB will be all over Serbia. We're publicly calling the Serbians out for selling stuff. Vucic came out and kind of denied it in public, but the Russians have obviously put more and more pressure onto Vucic, and now he's stopped arms sales. All arms exports have been stopped over Russian scrutiny over Ukraine. That's a real shame. That's halted all arms exports, denying that the move was in response to Russian criticism over munitions reportedly reaching Ukraine. Yeah, of course. So that has happened. As I said the other day, Putin has announced that the Oreshnik missile, the one that they used against Dnipro some time back, and it split into these sub-munition sort of nodes or whatever, they were not loaded, or they were kind of duds, purposefully so. But they're like, look, this is the Oreshnik, this is what we can do. And it's supposed to be this kind of new missile, except it's not really new at all. Anyway, Putin keeps threatening the use of the Oreshnik, and he said it a number of times. And actually, he said they've scaled up production a number of times. This isn't the first time he said this, but he's saying serial production of the Oreshnik, which has, quote, proven itself very well, is being launched. Well, how many times can you launch the same thing? Right. The Optron Stavropol plant, as I reported this morning, in Russia, which supplies microelectronics to the military and for Superjet aircraft, has ceased operations. The company is reportedly on the verge of bankruptcy according to Russian media. It's reported that since March 2025, it's suspended its operations. Fulfilling the state defense order resulted in losses exceeding $1.9 million. Contract deliveries were disrupted as of June. The company's accounts payable reached $2.94 million. As a result, the company can no longer operate. Its accounts have been frozen. And they blame this on the idea that the Russian state is forcing them to sell their, in this case, production cost of one diode is $46, but the military, the Russian state, set the price of that at $33. So they're making a loss on that. As a result, the losses have mounted, and now the company cannot cover its costs and is forced to reduce its staff. Now, we have heard from NATO sources to the BBC, I think it was NATO sources to the BBC, were reporting that Russia could carry on this war till 2027. They've got enough funding to be able to do it till 2027. Of course, it will just completely screw them over. But there are some that are claiming that actually their military industrial base is maxed out at the moment. They are unable to build more, which is probably why they're getting 25,000 North Koreans in to help them staff. Well, it's supposedly to train, though. Well, not supposedly. I imagine they get 25,000 North Koreans in to help build Shahed drones in Russia, increasing the capacity of their manufacturing sector for those drones. And then those get trained up, know how to make them, and go back to North Korea. And then North Korea makes those things for Russia. So there may be some areas where they can increase their production numbers, but in that case they're doing it by taking on 25,000 North Koreans. Russia has started sending white and not black Shaheds to Ukraine. They can be controlled directly from Russia, communications expert Flash told AP. Well, I don't know what makes them controllable by Russia if they're white but not black. They started off all being white or grey and then went to being black because black ones were much harder to shoot down at nighttime. But now that they're claiming they're going back to, well, this claim from Associated Press is they're going back to white ones because they can control those from Russia. And finally, we have the Russians have begun installing ship-based AK-630 anti-aircraft guns as long-term fire points. These look like Daleks, right? There you go. It's a Dalek. Anyway, they've installed these as long-term fire points. The AK-630 is a 6-barreled 30mm gun with a rate of up to 1,000 rounds per minute. So they can just absolutely fill the sky with lead. The guns are being removed from ships and deployed in the occupied south. So these sound like what are they called? The CCA? No, what are they called? Those guns where they just fire such an immense amount of stuff into the air that's your air defense, is that it just takes out whatever comes towards you to some degree. Just if you have enough lead thrown into the sky, then you can there you go, Daleks. Then you can be successful there. So they're taking those off ships and whacking them on trucks here and putting them at fire points. And we might laugh at that and think that they're reduced to doing that, but actually there could be some functional benefit for them doing that with that kind of fire rate. Right, that is military news. I'm just going to see if there is anything else worth discussing with regard to what's happened at NATO. So we've had, okay. So I'll read this to you. There's stuff coming out with regard to the meeting with Zelensky. If we go back a little bit, let's have a look. So a lot of this is relying on Max 25. Trump, somebody said in a certain way it was so devastating. Actually, if you look at Hiroshima or if you look at Nagasaki, that ended a war too. This ended a war in a different way. So he's going to be talking about the Iranian, the strikes on Iran. I don't think nuclear materials were moved, but both Israel and Iran are tired. Iran has warned the US about a strike on the US military base in Qatar. They were very nice. They said they were going to... He speaks like a 4-year-old. Man, they were very nice. I only know nice and good and bad. They said they were going to strike at 1 o'clock. Is that okay? Okay. and they took everyone off the base so they wouldn't get hurt, said the US president, channeling his inner child. It is possible that Putin has territorial ambitions outside of Ukraine. Oh, that's freaking huge. That is freaking huge. If Trump is admitting that it's possible that Putin might have territorial ambitions outside of Ukraine. Now, we've heard this. We've heard several people talk about, as soon as it gets into a NATO country, then that's boots on the ground, and you don't want American troops on European soil fighting a war over there again. But that's what will happen if we don't allow Ukraine to win. So this is the argument for Ukraine prevailing and for the US, in this case, to support Ukraine. This is so freaking important. And I hope he joins because what happens is Trump often says this stuff when he's on holiday abroad, and then he gets back to work back in the US, and all the Grimer worm tongues are whispering in his ear, Stephen Miller and Russell Ford and blah blah blah. All right, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I forgot. Ukraine are bastards, and I love Putin." Is that right? Is that right, guys? Yeah, you agree with that? Yeah. And then he goes on holiday to a NATO summit. And he's like, "Oh, where's Stephen Miller?" Or he's back. Oh, he's arresting Mexican people. Okay, so he's not here, right? Okay, so it's just me. Oh, and then people, then he sits down with like real world leaders, and they go, "By the way, Trump, this is what's really going on, and this, and this, and this, and this." And Trump goes, "Really? Jesus, wet! I wasn't aware of all this." So then he comes out and he's asked questions about it and says, "Yeah, it turns out that that the Russians might actually carry on after Ukraine, in which case American soldiers would be involved in going to help due to the invocation of Article 5, which means that Ukraine really need to win, which means that we need to be providing Ukraine with weapons and sanctions on Russia." That's how I would see that. But your first movement towards giving proper help to Ukraine, Jesus, criminy crickets. We're back to February 2022. Do you realize this? We are back to February 2022. Biden told us this in February 2022. So the fact that I'm absolutely staggered that Trump said this is ridiculous, because this has been the same argument since 2022. It's possible that Putin has territorial ambitions outside of Ukraine, but it's important that he's coming to this recognition. I mean, he's 3 years too late. So what else? Trump: "I think Putin is a misguided person. He's confused. Putin would like to end the war with Ukraine. Maybe Putin has territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine." Now, the only person who's confused is you, because you want to give Putin the benefit of the doubt, but it's clear that he's got territorial ambitions. You're now realizing he has territorial ambitions, but Putin keeps telling you he wants peace. He doesn't want peace. He doesn't want dialogue. He's not interested. He's only responsive to strength. So this is Trump who's confused, but he's saying Putin's confused. Putin is not confused. I love that. I love that projection. "We had a tough time with Zelensky, but he was very nice as always, and I'm very happy to see him. It was a great meeting. If I can, I'll talk to Putin about whether we can stop the war." I mean, the problem is he'll then forget about that, go back, speak to Putin, and Putin will just manipulate him, and he'll go, "Oh yeah, no, we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do that." And we just go through these cycles, right? So this is probably just continuing the cycle. However, this is the first time we have heard Trump be vaguely sensible in his rhetoric here. I mean, this is big. It probably won't last, but for the time being, he's saying something like the right thing. Yeah. Trump stated that he did not discuss a ceasefire with Zelensky. He just wanted to see how he was doing. Yeah, right. Just want to see how you were, mate. Just really worried about you, Z. Are you all right? Like, because you know how well we get on. You know that lovely time we had in the Oval Office when we all had a big party, and it was lovely. I just wanted to see whether you were still doing all right, mate. Are you still all right? Yeah. So he's going to speak to Putin. Good news there. What Spain does is terrible. So Spain is one of the lowest spenders on defense as a percentage of GDP, and they've got, so another thing that happened in the NATO summit is they got the wording changed from NATO members to allies or something like that to get to 5%, and it apparently might give Spain wiggle room not to get to 5%, something like that. So Trump is having a go at Spain. What Spain has done is terrible. That economy could be blown. Spain is the only country that's not paying. We're going to make a deal with Spain. We're going to make them pay twice as much. Spain refuses to pay. They're going to pay with trade. Wow. Is that Trump declaring a trade war on Spain because they're not spending enough on defense as a percentage of GDP? Okay. My words for ending the war in Ukraine in 24 hours were, of course, sarcastic. Yeah, whatever. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. He's on camera saying it at least 23 times, and not a single time was it sarcastic. Every time it was serious. And he said 24 hours and maybe even before the inauguration. It was never sarcastic. But he now knows it's far more difficult than he was expecting. Putin is a more complicated person. So there's your admission that it wasn't sarcastic. Turns out that Putin was actually a more complicated person. I also had problems with Zelensky. So it's like, yeah, this is the most complicated war. So on the one hand, he said, oh, it's being sarcastic. On the other hand, he's giving you the reasons why it couldn't be 24 hours. Oh, it's being sarcastic. It's really complicated. And these two people don't want to do peace because so on and so forth. Yeah, well done, Trump. But essentially, there could be some good news in terms of the rhetoric that is coming out from this. So he's obviously speaking at the moment, and Max 25 is giving the live kind of updates. We'll see if the US will provide money for Ukraine's defense. Putin has to stop the war. That is music to my ears, even though I'm not particularly confident that it will last anything more than a couple of days until he gets back to the US and then has some kind of brain fart and dementia takes over again. But for the time being, this is brilliant. This is what you want to hear. He's at least giving the option. He's not going, but they owe us 500 billion spondoolies. And if they don't pay us, I'm going to personally come around and with my baseball bat and extract it out of every single Ukrainian babushka. I'm going to go around and get those hryvnias out of their purses. And I beat them. Give me that money, but I want 500 billion spondoolies now. Bang, bang. He's not saying that. He's saying there is a chance that we'll see if we will provide money for Ukraine's defense. Putin has to stop the war. So, yeah, good news. I don't think it'll happen, but good news. I mean, what we want to see is the Senate or the bill to go through the Senate, the Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham bill, to be tinkered with so it's more feasible and then sail through Congress. That would be nice. Kiev wants to get Patriot missiles. We'll see. We really need them too. I see you're upset and I want us to be able to provide them to you. Ooh, Trump replied to the BBC Ukraine correspondent. Ooh. He's being normal. He's saying normal things. I love it when Trump goes to like the Vatican and he doesn't have anyone around him. And he goes to the NATO summit and he's standing up there and he's got no one around him. He's just been speaking to all the world leaders who are telling him exactly what's actually going on. He's not listening to rank BS of Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Kegsbreath and whatever. He's actually getting it from the horse's mouth. And here he's like, I see you're upset and you want us to sell Patriot missiles to Ukraine. Now, at least he gives a cogent answer here. Look, we need them as well. Like, we're fighting in the Middle East, and there's chances that our Patriots are going to be put to a lot of use. But we'll see. I see you're upset, and I want us to be able to provide them to you. Wow. I mean, I'm hoping these are accurate portrayals of what he's actually saying here. So there you go. Anyway, that's enough from me for now. But I think that's be interested to see what you guys are thinking about that. Okay. Yeah. Right. Let's go to some of you. Just a few thanks at the moment. I'm going to bring you back in front of me so you're not looking into my lug holes there. Right. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it, mate. Always the legend. Not the legend of the multiverse, but you're close, mate. You're getting there. Thank you. Sophie Dots, I really appreciate you. Thank you for your super Belgium awesomeness. Goose, good to have you on board, mate. Random question, but would you ever consider trying to get Preston Stewart on a live? Yes, I would actually. I think he has a really informative channel, does a lot of fundraising, and comes across as a really affable guy. Yeah, actually, that is a good option. It is. I keep meaning to get people on, but I'm so freaking busy at the moment. I'm just not getting around to speaking to people. I am speaking to Elliot Higgins, so that is happening in about a week or so. He's the Bellingcat guy. That's going to be fascinating. That'll be around about midday UK time, so it'll be early for you Americans. Too early for the West Coast, but yeah, so that'd be really good. And I was going to be speaking to oh, you man, what's his name? Anyway, I have got another one on the cards, but I need to get back to it. I really need to hit up Ben Hodges. Actually, that'd be someone I really want to speak to. And the number one person I want to speak to is actually Adam Kinzinger. I really, really want to speak to Adam Kinzinger. I find it fascinating when you have Republicans who have been rejected by MAGA, who are sort of going over to the Democrat side, but still like in that Republican frame of thinking, and a veteran who's very strong on support for Ukraine. Like, I think that's he'll be a fascinating guy to speak to. So he's my number one guy I want to chat to. Here's a little something towards that next bottle of Ukrainian wine. I do need to get some more. Thanks, BMA. I really appreciate that. And do you know what? Mark from the little whiskey shop might get an order coming from me. Right, Goose again. Thanks, Goose. On Ukrainian ballistic missiles, does the Iran-Israel war give a counterpoint to being a game changer? Iran wasn't able to stop the Israeli airstrikes, though you might argue Israel is uniquely prepared. So Israel have done a really good job. And what many people are saying about this is that Russian air defense systems are shite. Is essentially don't buy Russian, is what comes out of Iran trying to defend their airspace using predominantly Russian air defense systems. But also the Israelis are going to be using really good stuff. So, yeah, but also in terms of offensive equipment, in terms of defensive for the Israelis, they've got David Sling, the Arrow family of missiles. Then they've got their own Iron Dome thing for things like rockets and shells going into Israel. But for ballistic missiles, they can use Arrow and David Sling. So it's not just the Patriot PAC-3 and SAMP-T and the new SAMP-T that's coming online that can shoot down ballistics. There are other options, and the Israelis have by the looks of it, a really good option there. So if I was the Ukrainians, I'd be like asking the Israelis whether they could produce any. The problem is the Israelis are probably going to be maxing out their production because they're thinking they're going to need more and more of them. But well, to be honest, the Israelis have defended against everything Iran has probably had to give them. I guess you would if you could. You answer you can't. So I guess the Iranians threw everything at the Israelis, and the Israelis were pretty much able. There was destruction, but you're going to expect that. But they had a pretty good interception rate. And then there was a claim the other day that I was going through that they were using other air defense systems to take down ballistics that would indicate that you could possibly use things like NASAMS and RST in Ukraine to try and have a go at ballistics. There was some evidence that there's some success rate for these other systems too. There's certainly a lot you can learn from Israel for sure, and they've got some pretty damn good tech. Yeah, but the Iranians, I mean, it might be that those Russian S-300 systems and whatnot were just not good enough for the task, or B, that the Israelis are just really good at doing suppression and destruction of any enemy air defense sorties. They just planned it well and executed it very well with good offensive equipment. So yeah, the problem is these things are always so expensive, aren't they? These ballistic missile, anti-ballistic missile systems and interceptors, and there's probably an asymmetry there as well, where the ballistic missiles are probably cost less than the interceptor. I'd be interested to look at that actually. How much does a PAC-3 interceptor cost? against a ballistic missiles. So if you're thinking about a KN-23, a North Korean one, then that's arguably going to be pretty cheap. But yeah, so I think that's what we can learn from that. I don't know if I made any sense though. Who knows? Yeah, Bill Browder. There's so many people I love to talk to. It's just I don't get around to it. Yeah, I need a PA to sort it all out for me, because I end up speaking all day and then just going crashing, and then I've got other things to do as well, and it's just very difficult. And I get people complaining that I don't read their messages, and you know that I know Talaria's been having a go at me a lot recently, saying why aren't I forever talking about the UN, Russia not being, Russia not having a seat in the UN. It's like, because I'm reporting all the time, and I can't be everything to everyone. So I would love to interview some of these people. Definitely, all of the aforementioned people are people I'd like to speak to. Yeah, Adam Kinzinger is great. Would love to hear from him on your channel. Yeah, absolutely. He's right up there. So any other questions? Yeah. So I thought that Ukraine had already proved that Russian air defense was shite. Yeah, I don't know. I think some of it is good. Like, they have had planes getting shot down, and actually, I think probably an awful lot of drones have been shot down too in Russia. So last night, for example, there were claims that over 100 drones were sent into Russia, and we know very little about what was achieved. And this happens an awful lot, and I think partly because of OPSEC, partly because it happens in the middle of nowhere. A lot of these places might be in the middle of nowhere, but also I think probably a lot of these drones are shot down. Now, it's, on the other hand, it's probably quite easy to shoot some of the Ukrainian drones down. These are slow moving drones like the Lyuti. So what we were talking about earlier, the Germans spending hundreds of millions of euros to fund the manufacture of more Lyuti drones. These are long distance. In fact, let's try and find that drone for you, just so some of you don't know what I'm talking about, just so you can get it in your head. Lyuti drone. This is from May 2024. So they have, like, they've got this kind of twin tail at the back. That's not a very good picture, really. There you go. They're pretty large, right? Yeah, that's what they look like. That's a good picture there. So these are pretty large drones, but that's going to be fairly easy to shoot down. They're going to be flying at the same speed as a light aircraft, thereabouts. And actually, you can shoot them down relatively easily, especially since these are long distance drones, and they're often going hundreds and hundreds of kilometers to reach their destination. And that's hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. So 1,000 kilometers range there, it seems to indicate. You got 1,000 kilometers to shoot that thing down as it's moving very, very slowly. So I have a feeling that the success rate for Ukrainian drones being sent at targets a long way away in Russia is probably not great. And a lot of that will have to do with the distances, but also the Russian air defenses. So the Russian air defense might be, half. It's going to be half decent in sensitive places. Of course it is. Panzer air defenses are perfectly capable. But I reckon the Russians, just in general, and air defenses included, have been really overestimated right across the board militarily. Like, everything about the Russians appears to indicate something of a paper bear, a Potemkin village, Potemkin army. Now, they do have good electronic warfare, that at least at the beginning of the war they did. There's probably more of a parity now, as Ukraine have really ramped up, along with NATO and all their allies, ramped up loads of innovation and research and production. But I think the Russians probably had an advantage there. And yeah, I'm just trying to think of what else the Russians would be better than the Ukrainians at. Producing human beings to throw into a meat grinder. That seems to be much of it. And of course, there are good Russian units that do the right thing, kind of militarily and tactically. and they do have half decent weapons, but it's not, you know, everyone 3 days, everyone was thinking this war would last. And with 3 years and thinking, well, how can Ukraine now get the upper hand here and there and whatever? It's we forget how stunning it has been for the Ukrainians to last 3 years in this war. And we get frustrated when the Ukrainians don't do well enough, aren't like beating the Russians back, when you think there's a massive asymmetry in numbers. But it's phenomenal what Ukraine has been able to achieve. And yes, they've had all of these nations helping them, of course, and you know, it's somewhat easier when that's the case. But yeah, hats off to the Ukrainians. I don't think I say that enough, to be perfectly honest. Is Ukraine closer to NATO now? It's on an irreversible path by all accounts. I would say they probably are. I think Trump going away from this probably been a successful NATO. I think Mark Rutte is going to, and again, I've only reacted to this live with you, and I'm really going on what Max25 has summarized here. But if that's a fair representation of what Trump's been saying, then Mark Rutte did a bloody good job of fawning over Trump. Trump comes in, everyone says how wonderful he is. He gets to stand broadly in the middle of the picture. Everyone's like, oh, Trumpy Trump. Oh, well, you're so wonderful. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be paying more, blah, blah, blah. Which is somewhat true. But actually, the reality is they're paying, the 5% might, you know, okay, rewind. Right. Trump back in 2017, I can't remember when it was, in his first tenure, he went to that a NATO meeting and he spoke out of turn, and it was highly controversial, and he slagged people off for not paying enough. And NATO had to react, and they made some overtures, really actually quite small overtures, to kind of make it look like they were going to be paying a lot more, and Trump had an effect. And so that placated Trump then. So he already felt like, yeah, if it wasn't for me, these guys wouldn't be paying more. But realistically, it didn't shift NATO's expenditure all that much. But he took that idea that I've been asking NATO to spend more, NATO members to spend more, as like his thing. Of course, actually, Obama in 2014 started off the 2% thing because people weren't paying enough, right? So this has already been an issue, been bubbling on. The Americans resenting that the Europeans and Canadians hadn't been spending enough for some time. Trump takes that on for you know, for good reason, and he says that. NATO then react a little bit, and he goes, that placates him and says, yeah, I'm cool. And then 2022 happens. And 2022 is what shifted people's expenditure, really. Now, Trump's going to take responsibility for all of this expenditure increase. But actually, the reality of the situation is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is what prompted people to spend an absolute ton more on defense. And then Trump says, look what you're doing. I did that, which is a very Trumpian way of being. But then he did say 5%. But the 5% thing, I think, was a way of just, well, let's say something ridiculous that they're never going to be able to do. And even the US aren't going to be, for the US to spend 5% of GDP on defense means they're going to have to spend a gazillion dollars. I don't know what it is. They're spending $1 trillion now, and they're at 3.23%, something like that. So they're going to have to spend another $500 billion probably on defense. Now, at a time when Doge and debt ceilings and blah, blah, blah are a bit of an issue, finding $500 billion is not easy. So this was something that the US weren't going to be able to easily do. So he says, right, 5%, expecting, I think, that everyone would be like, well, you can't do that. And then he goes, right, you can't do that. NATO's over. Screw you guys. I'm going home. But then everyone's like, Russia really are a problem. We need to be seriously considering 5%. How can we get to 5%? And then he's like, oh, really? They've done it? Oh, goodness. Now, he can therefore take responsibility for the 5%. Now, it's also worth noting that, as far as I understand it, it's 3.5% on military expenditure and 1.5% on infrastructural expenditure. And I think that's going to be things like, well, there's no point, spending on all these tanks and weapons and if you can't move your tanks and weapons on the railway lines and over the bridges and do this and do that. So the 1.5%, I think, can be sold as being dual purpose, as maybe like civic as well as military. I'll have to look into this, but I'm fairly sure 1.5% is going to be spent on other things other than like weapons and military pensions and whatnot. In fact, I wonder if there's any explanation there. There's a really good Bloomberg live feed. Yes, here we go. Okay. So sorry, I'm going off on one here. So yeah, the new spending target includes 3.5% on core defense and 1.5% in related investment, including infrastructure and cybersecurity. Okay, so let's do a Control F there for 1.5. So here we go. Spain's resistance to committing to 5% GDP target, set to be backed by other European leaders, likely broken to 3.5 on hard defense and 1.5 on defense-related spending like cyber and infrastructure. Yeah. The interpretation, says the Belgian Prime Minister, of Spain is that they can realise the capabilities without doing 3.5% of GDP. This remains to be seen. If this is their interpretation, it is everybody's interpretation. Well, it's like, I can have the capabilities of that. So if you're saying I have to spend 3.5% on like tanks and planes, I can actually spend only 2.5% but still have the same capabilities. What is this? Ghost tanks? That seems a bit weird. But yeah. Remaining 1.5. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other details on that. Broader security outlays, so cyber defense and other things. I don't know, cybersecurity. So anyway, I've forgotten even what the question was there. So thank you anyway. Is Ukraine closer to NATO? So I think they are. I think that the whole NATO sounds like this NATO summit sounds like it was a success. I think Rutte's going to be happy. I think NATO member states are going to be pretty happy. Orban might not be, but who cares? And I think Ukraine are probably going to be very happy. If those statements from Trump were pretty accurate, then I think Zelensky is coming out from here going, that's a job well done. So yeah. Just trying to see if there are any more statements coming out from the NATO summit, but I don't think so. Oh, they've got General Kane. Okay, I hope you don't mind me doing this. General Kane has said that Mr. Putin has territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine. Oh yeah, that's what we. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. I mean, it's possible. I know one thing. He'd like to settle Russia-Ukraine war. He'd like to get out of this thing. It's a mess for him. Okay, that's less. In greater context, he's just saying he's kind of allowing General Kane, his commander-in-chief, to not be wrong here. So, okay, maybe not as decent as I was hoping, but still, generally, I think the NATO summit will be deemed a success, and I think that places Ukraine close to NATO. And like I said earlier, they will benefit NATO. NATO will be in a stronger place with Ukraine in it from a kind of military and an experience point of view. Yeah, the completion dates are going to be. I'll have to look at the completion dates. I know with the UK, we are looking at getting to 2.5% by the end of this parliament, and then 3.5% at the end of the decade, was it? And then 5% by the end of 2035, something like that. So 2% had a completion date at the end of 2024, saying in 2018 people aren't spending the required amount is typical. Yeah. So we'll have to see what the dates are. We'll see going forward. Yeah, I think Gen consensus. I think no. I think I'm sure the UK said 2035 for 5%. I mean, it would be anything sooner than that would just be too unrealistic. In all fairness, like we are in the UK screwed financially at the moment. We're desperate for economic growth, economic black hole. coming out of, it's really interesting. I know you guys don't like me talking about Brexit, but there's been some data now that's come out to suggest that Brexit has really hurt the UK. So the latest figures is that 40 billion a year in tax revenues from 100 billion of trade we've now lost every year. And basically, I think there was a politician last night that was saying, you know, if we had that now, then that's all our problems solved. Like it was, yeah. Who was it that was it an Irish? It was in an Irish newspaper. Brexit was the single worst decision of any government in the last whatever years. Like, so because it's a Brexit anniversary just the other day, there's been lots of stuff, you know, talking about this. Loads of outlets and analysts talking about this, and yeah, it's just not cool. And you know, had we had that money, it would be a lot different. But we don't have that money, so damn, sucks to be us. But many nations are going to be worrying about money, and they're going to have to find enough money to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, and you can't do that quickly. It's too difficult. But there you go. I wonder, I know where that is. That is, yes. So 40 billion hole in public finances, 4% hit to UK productivity, 15% drop in trade. And this is coming from The Times, which is a Murdoch newspaper, and $100 billion in tax rises, 40%, which Brexit made necessary. Oh, tax rises. Yeah, 40 billion hole in public finances. That's probably not a year, actually. I might have been misrepresenting that, which is here. So that is in The Times. So predictions of 40 billion pounds hit to public finances from Brexit, correct. So what happened prior to Brexit is, in the run up to the election, the Remainers were like, this is going to cost us. It's going to be an economically suicidal thing to do. And then all the kind of Braveheart people, you know, it's very easy to say, but look at our future. You'll never take away our freedom. We'll be this amazing country on our own. And then we come out of the EU and we're like, oh, shite. We've got to do loads of trade deals with people and we're going to get screwed over and we're like a minnow in a shark tank. And economically, it's been very, very difficult. And our closest trading partner is the EU by country mile. And we've now put up barriers to do trade. And so there are all these supposedly fear-mongering claims from Remainers. But what's happened is that they've come true. Like, none of the predictions of the Leavers have come true. Like, really, none of them. Like, our immigration went up as we started importing brown-skinned people from East Asia rather than Eastern Europeans. We're like, well, we still need the labor, so we're going to import them from somewhere else. So immigration went up. Sovereignty stayed broadly. You know, we still got a lot of the rules and regulations, especially if you have to trade with the EU. You have to then make things to the same specifications as the EU. So those kind of regulations are still like practically in place, and so on and so forth. And point here is that the predictions were actually correct. All these fearmongers were right, and it turns out the OBR said it's hit as 4% of productivity, and that loss that was predicted has largely been borne out. So the point is, and I know that's not what this video is about, but from the UK point of view, it's really frustrating because we've got a financial black hole, and we wouldn't have a financial black hole if we hadn't made that decision, or at least not to the degree we have it now. And it's deeply frustrating for me. But anyway, there you go. It's been and done. We'll have to see what happens from now on. And yeah, don't talk to me about Daniel Hannan. Yeah, led by donkeys doing good things with it. He's an anyway, there you go. Very good. Okay, so thank you very much to everyone in the live chat. I really appreciate your support. By the way, please go to Car for Ukraine. Go to atpgeo.com/donate, and you will be able to find what we are doing in terms of supporting troops on the front line and getting vehicles to them. We're creeping towards €7,000. Thank you to those who have contributed today. Really appreciate that. The donor wall's now got Colin McKinney, Tracy Assel, David Edwards. This is all from David Edwards is yesterday, so a couple for today. Thank you very much for those who have supported. Incredible generosity, particularly David Sengelman there, helping out to a massive degree, and also I keep forgetting the names, Mark S and Peter Kluken, very much so. And so many of you, you can see you're all there. Richard Jackson as well. So really kind. Thank you. Legends one and all. What else? Yes, one other thing I wanted to say. I did a video this morning. My first one was on the Israeli strikes on the Iranian cyber infrastructure that caused troll farms to be cut off. And suddenly the example was given that loads of fake accounts who were advocating for the Scottish independence were suddenly cut off. And that shows the degree of interference that we are receiving politically in so many areas. That's just the Scottish independent, but you can talk about Brexit or relationships with the EU, and this will happen all over Europe as well. Culture war stuff, immigration, they're all going to be piled on by the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Chinese, and of course the Russians. And I did a video this morning, and the context was around looking at some of these accounts who suddenly shut down, and they were massively in support of the Scottish referendum, but then smashing out together with being anti-Israel and pro-Iran. Some of you in the comments were like, don't start talking about Scottish referendum. You don't blah, blah, blah. The kind of, you don't know what you're talking about type thing or whatever, or keep to Ukraine. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, my video was nothing to do with Scottish referendum. Like, honestly, it was nothing. Like, that was just the example of the UK Defence Journal, where they'd looked at this and they'd looked at these Iranian trolls splurging stuff. It's taking real issues. Like, it's not to say that the arguments therefore for the Scottish referendum are false. Not at all. It's just that they amplify divisions that already exist. That's one division. It could be immigration. It could be, it's not to say there aren't problems with immigration. It's that they are amplifying the problems to make them seem bigger than they actually are, or to make it look like there are more people who believe these things than there really are in any given demographic. But please do not misinterpret me for suddenly being like anti-Scottish independence. Or I have my views on Scottish independence, which is Scotland, in my opinion, is better in the UK, and the UK is better with Scotland in it. We're better together, baby. It's kind of like the EU. I'm quite consistent. I find it really interesting when you had like leavers who are like, Scotland can't leave the UK. You can't, better together, blah, blah, blah. And said, but we're going to leave the EU. Hang on. You were just saying we're better together, but now, okay, but smaller thing and a greater thing. Okay. I'm fairly consistent, which is, I think we're better in the EU, and I think Scotland are better in the UK. But if you guys want to vote to leave, then we need to consider, and that should happen if there is, I would say, well, we can talk about supermajority, but basically you have a right to self-determination, right? And that's that. But what I don't want is international interference in our democratic processes. Even if it's amplifying things, it's just giving a false sense of the reality of the situation. I'm so against interference and disinformation. It is one of my bugbears. So by all accounts, have a second Scottish referendum, and if you guys want to leave the UK, I think it would suck. I think it's a wrong decision, but that's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. That's self-determination. So, like, none of that I talked about in my video this morning because it wasn't freaking relevant. My video wasn't about that. It was about disinformation coming from and cyber attacks, essentially information warfare coming from Iran. Anyway, that's that. I just had to put that straight. It is such an important issue. You're absolutely 100% correct. Okay, thank you very, 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 very much. I really appreciate all of you. You're all wonderful. Take care, and I will speak to you soon. And just before I release this video, I stupidly released my it was an Iran video. I did a video on the leaked report on the inefficacy of the strikes on the 3 nuclear facilities, and I shouldn't have released that straight before my live, but I just last minute decided to do a live. So sorry about that. So please go and check that other video out, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It would be so nice if you all subscribe. I know many of you won't actually be subscribed to my channel. It doesn't really make a difference, because actually the algorithm will send it to you if you watch enough of it anyway. You don't really need to be subscribed, but please do subscribe. I don't want much in life, right? I want to make my son happy, and my son wants one of those silver YouTube plaques where you get 100,000 subscribers, right? At the moment, that's going to take me about 4 years, if it happens ever, right? It ain't going to happen, but it'd be nice if I get a little bit closer, and so Oscar can be proud of his dad. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. That's all I really want out of life. You know, if I die tomorrow, I've had a pretty good life, I have to say. So, you know, I'm all right. But what I don't have is one of those stupid, meaningless plaques, which obviously means something to my son. So it means something to me. Anyway, I'm talking absolute nonsense. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye.